Good day to one and all. I'm Dr. Shashkala, Associate Professor, Bangalore City University, and I would be talking on Chapter 3. The subtopic is Rise and Growth of Communalism and Major Communal Violences in India. So the topic is Rise and Growth of Communalism and Major Communal Violence in India. Let's go for the introduction, where when we talk about how the concept started to grow, we already know that the communalism already had its root in the history of India. In fact, we are very familiar with the policy of divide and rule. So here, this policy of British was the main cause of communalism. So we can very well trace back to the revolt of 1857, which is also called as the first war for independence. Here we see that Hindu and Muslims who fought side by side, and they were united in the purpose defeating the common enemy. So the British noticed this unity. They realized that somewhere for their survival in India, this policy of divide and rule was a main weapon. We see that India had been a divided country at the time of their entry. We see that the famous policy of divide and rule for the British was one of the main factor for dividing people. It also used as a mechanism for their political, economic and social activity. So we see that when we are going through the history a long way, that communalism had its hold. We can even refer to Lord Minto, who was mainly responsible for widening the gap between the Hindu and Muslim. He was the one who demanded separate electorate for Muslim, and at all the level, the Muslims' representation should be in with their numerical strength. But here we see that the political importance and their contribution to the British Empire, Lord Minto, who assumed there as the special communal representation in excess of their population. In spite of India National Congress opposition to communal policies of the Muslim League, we see that the partition it was effected. Next, we see the Hindu-Muslim communalism. Here we see that 10th century, the Muslim attack of India which was started. But when we see about Muhammad Ghazni or Muhammad Ghori, we see that the very interesting story, there was lot of religious dominance. It was when Qutbuddin became the first Sultan of Delhi that we see that Islam found its major footing in India. And later the Mughals started to establish their empire and Islam in the process. There was a lot of destructions of Hindu temple. There were construction of mosque over the temples. And there were a lot of communal bickering which was happening between Hindu and Muslim community. So the British established their dominance in India through the East India Company. They initially adopted the policy of patronizing Hindu, and we see that it was in the first war of independence, 1857, in which the Hindu and Muslims fought shoulder to shoulder. So the British policy of divide and rule was the main hegemony to create the widening gap, and the gap started increasing. So the communalism between these two communities operate today in a significantly changed, which has eventually changed the socio and political milieu. So we see that the entire process of development of the country, where there is always a Hindu-Muslim communalism still happening. Let's come to the next topic on major communal violences in India. First of all, we see the partition of Bengal 1905, which was made on October 16. Here we see the then Viceroy of India, Lord Curzon. He was the one who promoted on the grounds that Bengal was a very large state with a large population, causing the eastern region to undergovern. However, we see the actual motives behind the partition was entirely different. Here, the position of the Bengali Hindus was weakened, and because the Muslims were very dominant in East, and it also led for the Hindu opposition to the partition, while the Muslims were highly favoring it. So here the partition of divide and rule policy, which was always in favor of Muslim, was welcome, but Hindus were not in favor of that. So meanwhile, we also see there was a Swadeshi movement to boycott the British good. Then there were also the scenarios which were the Britishers were not at all in favor of the Hindus. Next, we see the formation of Muslim League in the year 1906, the growing communalism, which led the Muslim forming a new political party called the Muslim League in 1906. Initially, we see that here the Muslims who were the educated classes, this at the same time where the Indian National Congress was gathering mass support from the members, they consist of young Muslim people also. At the same time, we also find Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was one of the force behind the creation of Pakistan. He was one of the main member in the Indian National Congress till 1920. Next, we talk about the Khilafat movement, 1919 to 1924, which was very, very significant for the Islamic movement in India. It was during this British rule. Here we see the successor of Prophet Muhammad, who was considered as a religious leader of Muslim all over the world. So this was one of the first religious political movement which began involving majority number of Muslims. Initially, the movement was targeted only for educated and elite Muslims only. And we also see there was some support which was received from Mahatma Gandhiji and Nehru. They related it to the non-cooperation movement with it. We also see that majority of Congress leader had joined hand with the political party. They came together there, but there was some injustice which were faced by the Muslim. While we see that there were some steps taken by the movement is non-involvement in the victory celebration, boycotting the British commodity, non-cooperation movement with the government. And we also find that various highly influenced and the most intelligent leaders, Maulana Muhammad Ali, Shaukat Ali, who were the Ali brothers, were among the leaders who used to protest from the jail, who raised their voice, and the voices could be heard through newspaper and magazine, which was awakening for the Muslim community. So we also see that the movement becoming a huge hub all over. Next, we shall concentrate on the partition of India 1947. After the partition, the Muslims populations were forced to move to the other border. Hindus, majority who were Hindus in Pakistan and Muslims in India, there were mass killing. Women were raped. Many lost their children, parents. There were hatred, there were violence, there were a lot of bloodshed. And it turned a problem of major refugee and rehabilitation, which became the biggest challenge for the independent India. Next, we also see that Hindu-Sikh riot 1984, one of the major bloodshed we can say, where the Sikhs in the large number were massacred by the anti-Sikh mob. We also witness at this time the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi by her own Sikh guard who were responsible for this action. The Sikh agitation in Punjab in the early 80s with the murder of editors, hijacking of Srinagar bound flight, the issues of passport, there were frictions in Khalistan. So the intense was becoming so very violent. Next, we also see the 1984, where military had launched the Open Blue Star operation for seizing the weapon and arresting the militants in the Golden Temple of Amritsar. The Sikh reacted violently. Here we also find that in 1984, where Indira Gandhi was assassinated and thousands of Sikh were killed in Delhi and other states, and their properties were looted, burnt and destroyed. Some Sikh militants agitated, they were killed. There were hundreds of Muslims in the trains, buses, their properties were destroyed, and many of the Hindus were forced to leave Punjab. Next, in May 1988, we also witnessed the Operation Black Thunder, which was once again by the military to clear the militant from the Golden Temple in Amritsar, which was under the siege for about 10 days. They were exploding bombs, killing Hindus, looting banks. The relation was so very strained, and we have witnessed the worst forever. Next, we see the ethnic cleansing of Kashmir Hindu Pandits, 1989, where we say that Kashmir is known for the heaven of India. But yeah, it is known for love, peace, harmony, brotherhood. But there was a serious blow to the extremist Islamic terrorism in the Kashmir Valley, which led to the mass killing and large-scale exodus of Kashmir Pandits from the valley to the various regions and corners of India, giving them the status of refugee in their own country. Next, the very 1992 Ayodhya or the Babri Masjid dispute. We say that Ayodhya is the birthplace of Lord Rama, and therefore it is a sacred place for Hindu religion. But in the medieval period of Mughal General Mir Babik built a mosque. After that, the Mughal rulers, we see there were the dispute which was increasing to such a violent kind that there was a main intention was political mobilization. The atmosphere was so very severe, there were protests by Hindu religion in the large scale. They visited Ayodhya from all parts of India. There was demolition of Babri Masjid and building of Rama Temple. These movements caused huge amount of bloodshed. Next, we see the Gujarat riot or the Godhra Valley burning of train 2002. The Gujarat riot is one of the more violent kind with intra-violent communal violence which was happening in the western Indian state of Gujarat. Other independent observers have stated that these events had met the legal definition of genocide. They call it as state terrorism. We see that one fine day the Sabarmati Express, which was returning from Ayodhya to Ahmedabad, was stopped near the Godhra railway station with several of passengers were Hindu. They were returning from Ayodhya after a religious ceremony and at the site of Babri Masjid demolition. Here we see the coach's train got fire, trapping many people inside, resulting for death, burns, including women and children. So we see that the violence is a black spot in the history of Gujarat and the nation too, as people were killed without any mercy. Next, we also witness the Assam communal violences too. Then which was known as distinguished to the tribal population and ethnic diversity, where there were ethnic clashes between the tribal Christians and the Hindu faith and the Muslim. The ethnic tension between the Bodos and the Bengal speaking Muslim escalated with the riots. There were mass killings. Then we also witnessed in 2013 the Muzaffarnagar. There was an ethnic clash between the Jat and the Muslim community, which was very much disputed, and there are many versions for this. For the communal violence which are continuously occurring. So in conclusion, we can say that communal violence is a common nowadays throughout the world. There are many alternative names for communal violence too: mass racial violence, minority unrest, ethno-religious violence. So communalism cannot be combated with the help of globalization as a tool. In the globalized world, we are seeing that it is becoming an integral part of the society. We always see there is movement of people from one place to another place, but it is not so easy. The conditions are dangerous. There are some violences. Government are taking some initiatives, but we still see that communalism do persist, and it has been hard sometimes to see the bloodshed, the women, the men. There are a lot of disharmony which are happening. Still, we are trying to promote some cultural exchanges through shows, program, heritage workshops, cultural visits to the students, to the parliamentarian, and to have a better idea about other culture and respect for other culture and religion. Thank you, one and all.